Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, by co-founder of Because We Matter, Kate Monaghan. Kate, how are you doing?
Hi, good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you join us. And a returning guest on the other side, James Dornan, the MSP for Glasgow Cathcart. And James, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Kenny. And you?
I'm not bad at all, thankfully. So we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,098,234 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,014,975 were confirmed negative, 83,259 were positive. There were 1,248 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly 37 new reported deaths. This will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those will necessarily get themselves tested. As always, we urge you, if you are showing symptoms of a new, dry, persistent cough, a fever, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then do please book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 1,249 people in hospital last night, 95 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 3,323. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 52,147 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 213. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. We should note, though, that these figures are actually yesterday's figures. They were updated very late yesterday before the show went on, just a few minutes before the show went on air. So these are yesterday's figures. Today's figures, which would be the number of people who actually died yesterday, haven't been reported yet. We also have the latest report from the Office for National Statistics, covering deaths in England and Wales for the week ending the 6th of November, which was week 45 of the year. The total number of deaths registered in that week where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate was 1,937. Of these, 1,771 were in England and 166 in Wales. This is an increase from the previous week of around 40% for England and around 34% for Wales. It's the 9th consecutive week of increasing deaths in England and Wales related to COVID-19. The number of deaths in hospitals was above the 5-year average for the 3rd consecutive week, while deaths in care homes and private homes both stayed above average as well, where they have been for several months. This report brings the total number of COVID-related deaths in England and Wales at the 6th of November to 58,645. And before we go on with the rest of tonight's news, if you'd like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. As you can see, we will be flashing some of these up on the screen throughout the show, so do please get in touch if you've got anything to say about any of today's stories. And our first story is, of course, the COVID-related one. 11 local authorities are to move into the highest protection level as efforts continue to suppress the incidence of coronavirus in the weeks up to Christmas. Speaking in Parliament this afternoon, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon also announced that travel restrictions will be put into law to prevent people who live in a level 3 or level 4 local authority area from travelling outside their local authority except for an essential purpose, such as work or caring responsibilities. The regulations also forbid non-essential travel into a level 3 or 4 local authority area except for the same reasons. The changes to protection levels will come into effect at 6 p.m. this Friday and will remain in place for 3 weeks until Friday the 11th of December. The City of Glasgow, Renfrewshire, East Renfrewshire, East Dunbartonshire, West Dunbartonshire, North Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire, East Ayrshire, South Ayrshire, Stirling and West Lothian will move from level 3, where they have been since the new level system was announced, up to level 4. The City of Edinburgh, Clackmannanshire, Falkirk, Inverclyde, North Ayrshire, Dundee, Fife, Perth and Kinross and Angus will all remain at level 3. Restrictions around outdoor socialising for those in level 1 are to be extended to allow 8 people from 3 households to meet outdoors. Previously, only 6 people from 2 households were permitted to do so. So, James, I'll come to you first on this. What do you make of this announcement from the First Minister today? Do you think this is the right move for Scotland right now?
I think it was unavoidable. It's clear, it's been clear for the last week or so that we were heading in this direction. The city of Glasgow, which I represent part of, is stubbornly high. And we've all got to hope that this 3-week break, will be enough to sort of cut the link and stop the growth of this, because if not, then we're going to be in for a very, very unhappy Christmas. It's down in our heads now. We've been told what it is that we've got to do, and I think that people have to take more seriously the consequences of behaving as if there's nothing wrong. And I know that most people are following the rules, are doing everything they've been asked to do, but it only takes a few to spoil it for the rest of us. And I still see occasionally people walking about in supermarkets without masks and stuff, and I just don't know what they're thinking at all.
Mm. And Kate, just coming to you now on this, we've seen, as I mentioned in that story there, that there are some legal changes. It is now going to be against the law to travel into or out of a level 3 or 4 area. Do you think that kind of thing is necessary in order to kind of, if not necessarily catch people and prosecute them for it, but to stress the importance of keeping within the regulations?
I mean, it's hard not to have sympathy with the government's position on imposing a more strict lockdown and perhaps making some of the changes lawfully binding. Given the situation, we're still in months and months down the line, and it also is easy to have sympathy with families who haven't seen each other, and our lives are so different to how they were a year ago when we had all the freedoms. My own son is lucky to be in a Campbell community, and we didn't see him for 14 weeks during the initial lockdown, and the longest we'd ever been apart before that was 4 nights. So a lot of people's, vulnerability has also got to be remembered. And whilst I have sympathy for sort of the idea that, it's probably not going to affect everybody seriously, for those that it does, and for our NHS to protect them, I think it has become essential again to take some more sort of deep-rooted steps to hopefully contain it. If only our Prime Minister had, back in February, perhaps gone to the Cobra meetings, taken things more seriously, we'd taken perhaps a more New Zealand approach of a severe lockdown, and that had been effective, we might not be in this position, but we are. So I think just pragmatically, we've got to do something, because the numbers are still not going down quickly enough, really.
Yeah. Speaking of the Prime Minister, who is, of course, self-isolating himself at the moment, the SNP has said that independence is the only way to protect Scotland's interests and democratic powers, after Boris Johnson was caught describing devolution as a mistake. In a call with Tory MPs, the Prime Minister claimed devolution has been a disaster north of the border and was a mistake, rubbishing unionist claims that the UK could become a federal state by arguing that he did not see a case for devolving more powers. It comes as the Tory UK Internal Market Bill threatens to attack the foundations of the devolution settlement by giving Westminster the power to overrule the Scottish Parliament in key devolved areas, including the NHS, education, transport, infrastructure, food, agricultural and environmental standards. Boris Johnson has previously showed his disdain for Scotland by claiming that a pound spent in Croydon is of far more value to the country than a pound spent in Strathclyde, that devolution is causing all the strains that its opponents predicted, and in allowing the Scots to make their own laws while free riding on English taxpayers, it is simply unjust, and that Scottish people are grossly overrepresented at Westminster. 14 polls in a row have now shown a majority for independence in Scotland, with the most recent poll by panel base showing support at 56%. The Welsh Government has also launched a withering attack on Boris Johnson's dismissal of devolution, calling the Prime Minister's remarks shocking and claiming the conduct of his administration is threatening the future of the United Kingdom. So, Kate, I'll come to you first on this. Do you think that Boris Johnson being revealed that he's said this to his Tory colleagues, do you think this will change a lot of minds about either attitudes to devolution or even attitudes to independence?
I don't know about changing minds, but I think in terms of his own party's strategy, I mean, for those of us that want an independent Scotland and a self-determining nation, please let him carry on doing what he's doing. I think he is individually perhaps the biggest recruitment sergeant for independence that we've got at the moment. The more he takes a high-handed, dismissive, disrespectful position like that to the National Parliament of Scotland, the more I think it will help people see the sort of disconnect, the lack of democratic accountability that Westminster presents still. And I think it's very ill-advised, but I'm not sure what they can do to amend their own position now, because almost every argument that they use for Brexit applies equally in reverse for Scottish independence. And if he wants to extend the hand of friendship, it seems a very strange for his new policy. So I have no idea if anything goes on in his mind. I can't imagine, but I think in terms of support for independence, it's got to be a good thing. A long way to carry on.
Well, James, coming to you now. George Robertson, one of Tony Blair's cabinet members at the time, said that the devolution would kill nationalism stone dead. So, in one sense, devolution really has been a disaster on that front, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a disaster. It's been an absolute disaster for the Tory party. And to be fair, I think that's what Johnson's talking about. I mean, let's be honest, anybody who remembers George Robertson knows just how ineffectual a politician he was in almost every way. And he was as correct in that statement as he was in most other things he did in his political career. The reality is that Johnson doesn't seem to realise that we're living in a multimedia world where people can communicate with others very easily, and he thinks that when he's speaking to one audience, he can say anything he likes and nobody else will find out. And so he tells the audience in front of him what they want to hear, and then he's shocked when other people find out about it, and he has to get his spokespeople to say that that's not what he said, or if he did say he didn't mean it. And anyway, then that's sort of horrible, and why aren't you voting for it? He's making life extremely easier for us every time he opens his mouth. And I don't think it's a coincidence, actually, that he's come down with this COVID at the same time as he's lost two of his biggest influencers, and Dominic Cummings and Kane.
Well, we do have a related story here. English Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick said that Scottish nationalists were deluding themselves if they hoped for another independence referendum in the middle of a health crisis. Jenrick said that Scottish nationalists had misused devolution to try to break apart the United Kingdom, and that another referendum was not realistic, as nationalists had agreed the 2014 vote was a once-in-a-generation referendum. Asked by Sky about another Scottish referendum, Jenrick said, "I don't think this is the right time to do that." So, given both of these stories, James, how confident are you that given a thumping mandate for the SNP in May's election, that there will be agreement on a referendum in relatively short order?
I have got no doubts whatsoever that there'll be a referendum in reasonably short order after the election. They may pontificate, and let's be honest, when you look at Jenrick's background, I'm not convinced that we should be taking the word of him on anything, never mind the fact that he thinks he's got the right to tell us that we're not entitled to self-determination. It's not for Robert Jenrick or Gordon Brown or others to tell us when is the right time for us to get our say on our constitutional future. I am confident we'll get a good result in May. I'm confident that there will be an independent supporting majority in the Parliament, and I am also confident that by the end of next year we will have had, or will be just in the process of having, that independence referendum.
And Kate, are you kind of as optimistic as the noises we're hearing from the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government just now that we will see an independence referendum in relatively short order next year?
I think there are several issues. I think we just touched on one about trust in what the government says, in what happened last time, the vow, Gordon Brown's been back out again, but they promised things that didn't happen. And we're fundamentally in a very different place to 2014. I think not only COVID, but also Brexit are two huge and systemic changes that the future of the nation looks very different, whatever perspective you have on it. And I think Jenric's comments today, again, were dismissive. He was sort of saying, nationalism is a bad thing. Well, that's going to be quite a hard position for them to maintain, given that Brexit's a nationalistic kind of, and so it actually is unionism. Unionism is in itself a kind of nationalism, a British nationalism, if you like. So I think to just continue to take the high-handed, repressive attitude, no, you cannot, it's just not sustainable, and it's getting into. I think maybe perhaps because of the loss of Trump as an ally and a similar, if you like, type of tone of governance across in America, England as a country is looking different to Britain as a united kingdom of nation states. And I think that is having an impact on Johnson. Is now this little isolationist, it's a kind of little England agenda, if you like. And I think that is changing minds. And people are starting to see the possibilities for Scotland in Europe and in the world as a global player in its own right, in a way that in 2014, I think people didn't look at things in that way. I think it was a bit of a vote for the status quo, which has been completely blown out of the water.
And Kate,
I'd like to comment on that
you
point,
mentioned
Jenny.
there Boris Johnson as the great recruiting sergeant for independence. Robert Jenrick kind of not helping his boss there with these words. What do you think is going on there? Do you think the English Tories don't care about Scotland, or do you think they're just being very, very badly advised on how to talk about it?
I mean, I was trying to think, is there anything now they could argue that would be effective at this point from there? If you play devil's advocate and put yourself in their position, what can they say now apart from sorry, we will now sit down, be collaborative, be partners? That's the only legitimate way I think they could go, and they seem to have no sort of culture of that. They don't behave in a collaborative, grown-up, sort of joined-up, holistic way, and that tone, that sort of oppressive almost tone, is just it just sounds terrible to me. So I can't see how it. I just don't know what they're thinking. It's impossible to second guess. But I think anything that carries on in this tone is you cannot have a parliament. You cannot have an independence referendum. Hopefully, is from their point of view counterproductive.
And just to come back to you quickly, then, James. Given what Kate has talked about, this this tone that the Tories could conceivably take to start trying to win a bit of support back for the union, do you see any future referendum campaign being almost quite easy at that point because the Tories are doing such a bad job of making a case for the union?
It's not going to be easy because we're going to have all the weapons of the state aimed at us, including the media. But I have to laugh. I don't mean I'm laughing at Kate, but I have to laugh at the idea that the Westminster government are going to come and sit down with us and be partners. What they might do is they might say that we should leave, not leave. But I'm sure we've heard all that before. And the reality is, I don't think that the attitude of the English government, Westminster government, my apologies, has really changed a lot, because it's always been the sort of government of empire. It's been Britain and England have been exactly the same thing. It's the people round about that have changed. The Scots and the Welsh and Northern Irish have all decided that this is not acceptable anymore. The government in England has continued to behave the same way. English Tory politicians and Labour politicians. I'm 67 and I have never seen a parliament or a government that took Scotland seriously. There's been different variations, there's been degrees of it, but I've never seen a parliament that really took Scotland seriously. And this one is one of the worst, if not the worst. But nothing's going to change as long as we're part of the Union. England comes first, foremost, and primarily, but almost totally important. The rest of us don't count at all.
Well, we do move on now, and the SNP has said that the only way to protect Scotland's place in Europe is to become an independent country. After a new poll by YouGov across the UK revealed 85% of respondents from Scotland expressing a view think the UK government is doing badly at handling the UK's exit from the EU. Responding to the poll by YouGov, which was held on the 12th and 13th of November, which also revealed that 77% of Scottish respondents expressing a view think that the UK was wrong to vote to leave the EU, Kirsten Oswald MP said that Scotland has been completely ignored by Westminster throughout the Brexit process, and the people of Scotland deserve a choice over our future and the chance to escape Brexit. The SNP's Westminster Deputy Leader said that as a result of Tory red lines, the UK was heading to a very bad low deal or no deal extreme Brexit outcome, and that it was already too late to avoid significant disruption and lasting damage when the UK terminates the transition period. So, James, I'll come back to you first on this one. It's not really a shock that the people of Scotland have said they're opposed to the EU, leaving the EU, and that the UK government's doing a bad job of arranging it. How big a difference do you think this makes to politics generally in Scotland? Do you think the Tories in Scotland, for example, have insulated themselves well enough from the Brexit project to avoid some of the fallout from this?
Scottish Tories are a strange bunch. They want to pretend that they're different, but they take their orders from down south. The vast majority of them oppose Brexit, and now they're 100% behind it. No matter what sort of deal it is, the important thing is to take back control, which seems to make Kent a toilet, have massive queues, not get the medicines that require. They all accept this in the name of the union. They call us nationalists, as Kate quite rightly said. The most insular group of nationalists are unionists. We're an internationalist party, whereas they're the party that are drawing up the barricades and trying to make sure that nobody gets in except for the people that are like them or their type. So I'm not surprised. This just feeds into everything else we were saying. Europe is just another reason why support for the SNP at Westminster, but more importantly, the independence, continues to grow. And I go back to the point that I've got no doubts at all that after a good result in May, that we will be fighting that independence referendum in the near future after it.
And Kate, to come to you on this now, there's some figures in this story, a study from Warwick University showing that Scotland is already £3.94 billion worse off due to Brexit, and that's before we've left any of the EU's institutions, we've left any of the trading arrangements. How worried are you that damage that's been done, the damage that's coming at the end of this year, is going to be irreparable, even if Scotland does achieve its independence very quickly after that? How worried are you that where there's going to be a big hole to climb out of for a newly independent Scotland?
Well, I mean, it's quite scary for those of us with loved ones who depend on sort of the state, the welfare state, for people who need support on where on earth we're going to end up financially. Up here in Aberdeenshire, I was reading that, I think it was in the FT, that Aberdeen is going to be the place in the UK that's going to be the worst affected post-Brexit. And I think people haven't yet begun to see the impact of Brexit because we're not yet past the 31st of December. So I think people are unaware perhaps still of the negativity that's ahead of us. And, I was actually really cross that Dominic Cummings was left because I wanted him to be there to be held to account and alongside, those elected representatives in that party that have made these decisions. I hope they can't all walk away. David Cameron made this choice, this decision for the nation. He's nowhere to be seen to face the consequences, and it is worrying. It's quite scary. We just don't really know. Nobody seems to know. We've got the issue with trust with the mainstream media. Can we believe, what we're told? Do they just believe what the government's saying? I guess next year it will all become clear, and it is. I think people are genuinely afraid of what position we're going to be in as a country. Both Scotland and the UK after it, for something that we just never wanted, that nobody's ever made a positive case for, as far as I can see. I mean, I'm firmly against it, but I've never heard any positive benefits of it even put forward. It just seems to be unmitigated disaster about to befall us in the middle of a global pandemic. So those two things colliding, it's quite scary.
Yeah, we will obviously keep you updated on all the Brexit developments. We expect obviously something to happen about a deal in the next week or so. But we move on now to next year. And new legislation has been published to make sure that next year's parliamentary election can take place fairly and safely during the coronavirus pandemic. The poll is expected to go ahead as planned on the 6th of May, and the Scottish General Election Coronavirus Bill has been drafted to provide powers, if needed, to conduct the election differently. The bill, developed in partnership with the Electoral Management Board, the Electoral Commission, the Scottish Parliament and political parties, introduces key measures including an earlier deadline for postal vote applications of the 6th of April rather than the 20th, to give more time for these to be processed given an expected increase in demand, and powers for ministers to allow polling to take place over more than one day if needed to support physical distancing at polling stations. Measures have also been included for the highly unlikely event that the election has to be deferred. The bill therefore moves the dissolution of Parliament to the 5th of May rather than the 25th of March to ensure that MSPs can pass emergency legislation to delay the election if required. So, James, looks like you're going to be working right up until election day in Parliament. How valuable do you think these rules or this new legislation is going to be?
Yeah, I'm delighted to see it happening because it gives some certainty, as much certainty as you can get in these difficult times, about when we're going to be having the election. Because it's not that long ago that people, including politicians, were completely unsure about if it was going to go ahead, what circumstances it would go ahead, and this does give, as I say, this level of certainty that it will do. Postal ballots are going to be the biggest part of this election. We saw what happened in America. And I suspect it will be following a similar path over the next 6 months or so.
Mm. And Kate, does it worry you, this idea of an election, or does the experience of places like the USA that we've seen in recent weeks, does that give you some confidence that Scotland can manage this election safely and fairly?
I think it can be managed safely and fairly. I think postal voting in America has been scrutinised in an unexpected way, perhaps and are shown to be robust, and that's a good enough way to proceed. I think it would be strange for activists, for campaigning, perhaps those types of activities. But in terms of actually voting, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the capability. I guess the discussion will all be like we're not in person now; it will all be online and virtual, and I think the change will be in the campaigns rather than in necessarily the voting, and that can be done in a remote way.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how the parties adapt to campaigning in a virtual world. But we move on now, and the SNP has today published its submission to the UK government's Integrated Foreign Policy and Defence Review. Beyond outlining the party's long-established opposition to Trident nuclear weapons, the submission underlines the SNP's commitment to the rule of law and multilateralism, and it challenges the UK's approach to protect Scottish interests and values abroad. The party also calls for the UK government to sign a comprehensive defence and security treaty with the EU, and explores how the MOD can prepare itself for the more nuanced threats of the 21st century. Pushing the UK government to see beyond Whitehall, the submission calls for fresh engagement with devolved administrations and civil society to build a coherent foreign policy that properly represents the values and interests of Scotland, and warns that the UK government must look to submissions from across party divides to tackle issues including a sustainable funding settlement for the MOD and helping to build broad consensus for the environmental and development challenges of the future. So James, I don't know if you were involved in this whole process at all, but do you feel that the SNP's contribution here is, first of all, is it valuable? And secondly, will it be seen as valuable by the Whitehall Mandarins reading it?
I suppose it's valuable to the extent that what it does is it gives us a practice run into what we would be putting forward in our Manifesto for Independence. So yes, it is valuable in that extent. I mean, it's not useful to the extent that we're not going to be part of the union long enough for that to take part, to play a significant role in it. And those that are reading it are just going to ignore us. They've always ignored us in the past. They're just going to ignore us in the future. But yes, it has been a useful exercise. There's some things in it that I'm more in favour of than others, but that's why we have conferences and why we'll have debate within the party when it comes to making that party policy. But I'm happy that we did it. It will serve us in the future, but just now I don't think it will make any difference to what Westminster does.
And Kate, coming to you now, what do you think Scotland's role should be in the world just now? How should Scotland be presenting itself to the world, both now and potentially as an independent country in the near future?
Well, I've been very pleased and proud to see our First Minister speak so strongly against, and indeed Ian Blackford in Westminster, against the UK government breaking international law. I just find it absolutely astounding that it's come to that point and that they're prepared to take illegal actions and knowingly and deliberately so. It's shocking, and I think for all citizens that's a matter of grave concern. We need to live in a country where we can trust whatever government to behave legally, primarily and fundamentally, and behave in a way that is respectful of international law, much of which, ironically, our country has contributed to establishing in the first place. And I hope that that will never happen again. And I hope that we will continue to be a country to be looked at by the world in a different way, and the differences are profound between Holyrood and Westminster are clear to the world. Because they're very, very different cultures and attitudes and behaviours, and that's wonderful for us at Peak. And I hope that that long may it continue in Scotland, that we are an emblem of lawful government.
Yeah. Well, we look now across the Atlantic, and President-elect Joe Biden today named several top advisors from his election campaign and a Democratic congressman as senior White House aides, sticking with a tight inner circle as he transitions into the presidency. Biden is focused on preparing to take over the presidency on January the 20th, despite President Donald Trump's increasingly tenuous efforts to reverse the outcome of the November 3rd election. Biden's presidential campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, the first woman to lead a winning Democratic presidential bid, will be named a deputy chief of staff, Biden said in a statement released by his transition team. Longtime advisors Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti will join the White House as senior advisor to the president and counselor to the president, respectively. Dana Remus, the campaign's top lawyer, will be senior counsel to the president. Biden, who may name more staff soon, could still be weeks away from naming his cabinet appointees. So, James, a lot of these names won't be very familiar to people over here, but the fact that Biden is progressing with this, with his transition, he's starting to staff up his team, it does show, I think, that Donald Trump's challenges to the process are not likely to have much of an impact on the president-elect, are they?
I think that Biden's handled it very well. He's just ignored pretty much everything that Donald Trump has said. He's carried on as if he's taken control on the 20th of January, which he will be, and he's putting his team in place for that. The downside to what's been happening is the fact, not that Trump makes these ridiculous noises, nobody pays any attention to him anymore except for the mad right-wingers that are running about with Land Rovers with weapons of mass destruction in their back. But there's things like COVID that he should be getting in there and being allowed to put in place how he wants to deal with it when he comes in January 20th. There's things like the intelligence briefings that he should be part of just now, which has always been part of the system. And it's quite shameful that Trump, his ego is so big that he won't even allow somebody to do that. So I think that he's done everything right. I'm delighted he won. I thought he was a good candidate. And I just hope that what he does in the future with his cabinet is that he brings in some who are more radical than he is himself. I mean, he won because of his centrist positions, because he's a good man, and that's what the country needed. And now what I hope he'll do is he'll bring in some of the younger, more radical ones that to make a kind of democratic party for all the country, as opposed to just a part of it, as some would see it as just now.
And as you said, Donald Trump has been trying to challenge this process. He's had most of his legal challenges thrown out. There's no real evidence for anything that he's alleging. But given that Trump is now talking about, he's rejected Fox News and he's leaning towards even more extreme right-wing news channels that are perhaps less attached to the facts and any sort of integrity than even Fox News. How big an impact do you think that can have? Or do you think that the majority of people do just accept that the election's over and that there's not a fight that can still be won for the president?
I have got no doubt that the vast majority of Americans, happy or unhappy, have accepted that that's the result. The problem is that the small minority is still a sizable group of people, and they have. I mean, in America, it's ridiculous when you see them. They look like armed militia going to vote or stand outside the polling stations or going to rallies. And it's terrifying. And that's who he is aiming at now. I'm still not certain there won't be a lot of trouble between now and January the 20th or slightly after that. And that will all be down on his head. And I really hope he pays the price for this when he's no longer a president. Because if ever somebody deserves to be in jail, it's that man there. He's done nothing but bad since he became president and beforehand.
Yeah, Kate, coming to you now. What do you make of the way things have developed in the US over the last couple of weeks? Do you think that Joe Biden is just going to smoothly transition into power and that eventually Donald Trump will just walk away with his tail between his legs? Or do you think there is still some challenge that Donald Trump can make that could somehow disrupt that process?
I hope that Trump will do nothing to prevent a smooth and lawful transition. I think America needs it, Western democracies need it to have a legitimate process of governance broadly, needs it. You just can't have all these abandoning of the proper process and law and expect credibility. But Biden's been around an awfully long time, for 40 years or whatever. He's been the vice president. I love the Obamas. I think they've been the most classy, benchmark setting, kind of scandal free presidency for 4 years, 8 years. And now we have um, a vice president, a female vice president, a non-white vice president. It's fabulous. We've got rising stars like AOC. We saw a surge of voters that have never voted before, and so I think there is still a lot to be positive and hopeful about. And America is such an important, influential nation in the world, and I hope for them all that it goes smoothly.
Well, speaking of the US's international influence, we've heard Joe Biden criticize Boris Johnson personally. He's criticized Brexit as a bad idea, as an English nationalist project. We've also seen him express extreme concern about the effect of the internal market, or sorry, the effect of withdrawal bill on Northern Ireland. And he's very concerned about the damage that might be done to the Good Friday Agreement. How do you think a Joe Biden presidency is going to affect British politics over the next, say, year or two?
I think it's good news for Scotland, good news for Ireland, good news for Wales, and it must be troubling in Westminster because they've aligned themselves with the outgoing Trump administration. They emulate it, they behave in a similar way, they talk in the same tone, and much of the sort of toxic narratives and discourses is sounded the same to many of us who aren't politicians. So I think I hope that he will be an ally to Scotland and the world generally as a good guy, as the global leader, as it were, if that's not an outdated concept of the President of America.
Hmm. Well, we move on now and come back to Scotland. And veterans across Scotland will continue to have access to a range of welfare and psychological support, with more funding for mental health services. The Scottish Government is providing Veterans First Point Scotland with more than £658,000 to continue to deliver its services in 2021-22. The charity has a network of 6 regional centres across Scotland and provides essential support to veterans through peer support delivered in person and online. Now, James, coming to you first on this. The military obviously is still a reserved matter, but the Scottish Government here meeting some of the needs of veterans that aren't being met by UK resources. Is this something that the UK government ought to be doing, or do you think this is properly the responsibility of the Scottish Government?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that these are people who live in Scotland, the people who have fought for this country while it's been part of the United Kingdom, and they deserve all the support they can get from us. The United Kingdom has got a long history of letting down their soldiers once they have no use for them anymore. So it doesn't surprise me when it's left to others to try and support them as best they can. Now, I am a great supporter of making sure that our veterans are looked after, and even in Glasgow, I managed to get some of the housing associations to buy houses strictly for veterans if required. So I think that what the Scottish Government is doing is a great thing, and long may it continue. But hopefully it doesn't continue too long until it is our responsibility solely. Because remember, we're going to have a defence force of whatever type, and we're going to need people to man it.
Mm-hmm. And Kate, coming to you now. Again, veterans obviously suffer a range of really severe problems, especially things like PTSD on their return. Does this sort of thing sound like the kind of thing the Scottish Government should be investing in?
Absolutely. I welcome this very much as a disability campaigner. I think no matter the circumstances in which people become disabled, and not everyone is born disabled, life has many roads and paths that lead in different directions. And I just welcome any and all support for everyone in need in Scotland. I'm very proud of the government doing this and welcome it wholeheartedly. For everybody who has any need in a civilized nation, I think we can judge ourselves on how we treat those that are most vulnerable and most in need of our help. And yeah, I think it's a great announcement, very positive, and pleased to hear it today.
Well, on that note, we come to our final story tonight, and the child disability payment will be the next new benefit to be introduced by the Scottish Government. In an update to the Scottish Parliament today, Cabinet Secretary for Social Security Shirley Ann Somerville said Social Security Scotland will start taking applications from summer 2021 as part of a pilot, ahead of a full rollout across the country from autumn of 2021. This will be followed by the introduction of the adult disability payment, which will be piloted from spring 2022 and available across the country by the summer of that year. The child disability payment will replace the DWP's disability living allowance for children, and the adult disability payment will replace the personal independence payment. People who currently get UK government disability benefits will be transferred to the new Scottish system in stages after the new benefits are introduced. This work is expected to be completed to the previously announced timeline of 2025. Once the adult disability payment has been rolled out, anyone on the personal independence payment or working age disability living allowance who reports a change in condition, has an upcoming review date, or is about to reach the end of their DWP award period will transfer to Social Security Scotland so that they do not have to undergo a DWP face-to-face assessment. The Cabinet Secretary also confirmed the ambition to roll out the Scottish child payment to under 16s by the end of 2022, subject to getting the data for 6 to 16-year-olds from the DWP. So, Kate, I'll come to you first on this one. Obviously, this is the kind of issues that you have been campaigning on for some time now. What's your feeling about the launch of this new benefit? Is this everything you hoped it would be?
Well, I should just say that some of the political opinions I've given tonight are my own, but our organisation is non-party political, non-partisan, and we have members who support all different political parties in Scotland. And on this issue, we are united, and it's our purpose. And I think anything at all that can be done and is introduced that makes it less of a battle for families has to be welcomed. One of the things that I would never have believed before I had a very disabled child is how difficult it is to get help in the sixth richest economy in the world. It is a battle, it's a fight, it's ingrained, it's systemic, and some of the horror stories of the interviews with the DWP and things that have been shocking. And I think if people understood how disabled people are actually treated, the embattled nature of it, the asymmetric fight that it is of individuals and their families against the institutions, they would be shocked too. And I really welcome the change that the Scottish Government is bringing in the tone, in the language, in the attitude, in what they're trying to do to transform social care and make it a supportive service. And that is not the way it's been in a Westminster-led service provision. And it's just the most tragic thing that when you've already drawn the shortest straw in life and you've got so many hurdles to thriving, and everything in life is such a challenge, such a difficulty, such a fight, that you also have to genuinely battle for what you're entitled to. And it's heartbreaking. We hear stories every day that make me cry, and I do welcome any changes at all that can bring in a greater support, but a more accessible support, a more supportive support, a system that feels like it's on your side, not against you, doesn't treat you like an enemy, doesn't try and stop you getting what you need. So,
okay, we've all heard DWP horror stories for many years now. The Scottish government has been criticised for how slowly it's taken over some of these social security powers, but the attitude, this different tone that you talk about, is that something that in the disability world, perhaps as a campaigner, is that something that you've found the Scottish government has kind of stood up to its language, that it has been listening, that it has been caring in the development of these policies?
there are lots of very positive engagements, and I don't know if I can mention it now, but there is at the moment a consultation just beginning on transition. It's actually a private member's bill brought by a Labour MSP, but it's got cross-party support from 53 MSPs from all 5 parties, and then it will make a legal document to support very disabled young people from 16 to 25, which is a very innovative plan. And I would urge anybody watching who has been through or is going through a transition from children's to adult services to engage with that consultation on the government's website. I think just from our family's point of view, if I can say so, I feel like the difficulties come into play when we try and hold the local authorities to account in delivering on what's often a legislative change in the Scottish government and at the Scottish government level, but it often is very hard to see. You might gain a right or gain a benefit, but how do you actually secure that benefit if the local authority which deliver the service are difficult? And many of our stories actually come from battles with local authorities. So if I could say anything at all to the Scottish government, it would be to try and ensure that the legislative changes that they make have some kind of element of redress or consequence or accountability or something within the law itself that means that local government can't just ignore it, can't just, ignore the Equality Act, for example, which we have cases of. It is quite astonishing, and I don't understand how local governments are supposed to be accountable, but they don't appear to be. So if there's a failing, a systemic failing, I feel like it's that there's a disconnect between what seems to be really positive intent in government to bring legislative change that's beneficial to the people in need, but that isn't being borne out in delivery because of a different attitude in some councils, not all councils, I should
Well,
say.
let me just quickly
very-
put that to James then. James, I know you're not a member of the Scottish Government, but you do have friends there. Is this ability to take action against local government that isn't doing its job properly, is that something that you can see the Scottish Government delivering?
I've got to say, listening to Kate there, there's not one word she said that I disagree with. I thought that her comments just highlighted the importance of this piece of legislation, and I think that two words that come across loud and clear with what the Scottish Government's trying to do is respect and compassion. In any legislation that's getting put through here, the last point that Kate raised was something that I've been an MSP now for 10 years, well, the best part of 10 years, and the amount of cases that we've had exactly that, where legislation's been put in place, but the local authorities have decided that they can't afford it, or it doesn't quite fit in with what they're going to do. They're going to go another way. Self-directed support, which I thought was a great piece of legislation, was getting ruined in Glasgow because of the way Glasgow was dealing with it at that time. So I completely agree that there has to be a smooth transition from government right through to local authority or anybody else who's going to be responsible for it, so that the person who needs the help gets the help as and when it's required. Otherwise, the legislation just looks good but doesn't do the purpose it was set out to do.
Well, that's a great point of agreement on which to end the show this evening. Thank you very much to Kate and to James for their time. And thank you at home for joining us as well. Now we are tonight. I always, excuse me, I always do at this point ask for your money. But today we're launching a special appeal for your money. This is our crowdfunder. We're trying to raise £100,000 at the moment. We're hoping that over the next few months, if we can raise that kind of money, that we can employ a full-time editor in the show for the show, and that we can also employ some other journalists. That's where the vast bulk of that money will be going. So if you're interested, then you know where to find us. But before we do that, I am going to let you get a wee preview of our campaign video for it.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%. So that was our crowdfunder appeal video. As ever, if you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate to donate to the crowdfunder, or /register to sign up as a supporter. We would love to have your money, quite frankly. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely do understand, though I am just kidding about us being greedy. You can still make a big difference, though. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then share the shows around with people. Let people know where we are. Let people know about the crowdfunder as well. Please share that around so that we can get the biggest, the broadest support possible for the channel as we go into, as we've said tonight, what looks like a very momentous year for Scotland next year. And finally, with this money, we, as I said, we're hoping to employ some staff, but we would also like to encourage you to volunteer. With the election and with a potential referendum, for example, we are going to want camera crews in every count location. We can't do that. We can't necessarily pay everybody to do that. But if you're interested in volunteering for that kind of job, we would love to hear from you. So that is all we have time for tonight. Thank you very much once again to Kate Monaghan and to James Dornan for their time. Thank you again for joining us. I'll be back again tomorrow night, where one of our guests, I am told, will be Dr. Philippa Whitford, who's always an engaging guest. So do join us then. But until then, thanks very much. Have a great night. Brilliant. Thanks very